In the untamed expanse of Montana Territory, 1876, a fatal miscalculation would teach a band of ruthless outlaws why you never underestimate a quiet man with a military past. When the Hawkins gang torched Thomas McKnight's homestead, they thought they were dealing with just another aging farmer who would bend to their will. They couldn't have been more wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 15 years, Thomas McKnight had been captain of the 2nd United States Cavalry, leading charges against Confederate positions that would become legendary in military circles. His men had called him Prairie Ghost for his ability to appear from nowhere, strike with devastating precision, and vanish into the landscape. Now, the Hawkins gang was about to learn why some warriors never truly lay down their swords. The morning frost still clung to the tall grass as Thomas McKnight walked. His fence line, his specially bred Morgan horse Thunder, following close behind without need of reins. At 52, McKnight moved with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle, his weathered face and calloused hands masking the tactical mind that had earned him commendations from General Sherman himself. The vast Montana. Sky stretched endlessly above his 100-acre spread, painting the morning in shades of amber and gold. His homestead sat nestled in Shadow Creek Valley, where the Bitterroot Mountains provided a natural fortress of rocky outcrops and hidden valleys. He'd chosen this land carefully after leaving the cavalry, recognizing the tactical advantages that would have served him well during his campaigns against Chief Red Cloud. Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, the horse's posture tensing slightly. McKnight had learned to trust his mount's instincts during countless scouting missions. The horse had saved his life more times than he could count. The morning air carried an unfamiliar scent, not the usual smoky sweetness of pinewood from neighboring homesteads, but something sharper, more chemical. Sarah Bennett, who ran the general store in nearby Fort Blessing, came racing up the trail on her bay mare, her usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious distress. "Thomas!" she called out, reining her horse to a stop. "The Richardson place was hit last night. Everything burned to the ground, their cattle scattered to the winds." McKnight knelt to examine the soil near his fence post, noting fresh hoof prints. That shouldn't have been there. The tracks told a story, heavy horses, iron-shod, moving in a pattern that spoke of military training. Not Indian ponies and not the lighter marks of regular ranch horses. "They do this to anyone else?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd been tracking the pattern of violence spreading north from Wyoming Territory for weeks now. Sarah nodded, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "The Wilsons lost their barn last week, the Coopers before that. The Hawkins gang is moving north from the Powder River country. They're not just rustling anymore, they're taking over. Whole territories running some kind of protection scheme. Sheriff Morris says his hands are tied. They've got connections in the territorial government, the Hawkins gang." McKnight had heard whispers about them in town, former Confederate guerrillas who'd turned to organized crime after the war, led by brothers who'd learned their trade riding with Quantrill's raiders. They'd evolved beyond simple banditry, using terror and violence to establish control over vast stretches of territory. They targeted isolated homesteads, knowing law enforcement in the territories was spread too thin to respond effectively. "They're different from the usual outlaws," Sarah continued, her voice tight with worry. "They've got military training, strategy. First come the warnings, burned buildings, scattered livestock. Then they offer to buy the land for pennies on the dollar. Those who refuse—" She trailed off, but McKnight could fill in the blanks. He'd seen similar tactics during the war, when Confederate raiders would terrorize Union-sympathizing communities. Thunder suddenly tensed again, this time turning his head toward the eastern ridge. McKnight's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard, a motion so practiced it was almost unconscious. Through the morning haze, He caught sight of riders moving along the ridgeline, their spacing and formation immediately recognizable to his trained eye. 3 riders moving tactically, he said quietly, more to himself than Sarah. They're mapping approaches, looking for defensive positions. It was what he would have done back in his cavalry days before launching a raid on an enemy position. Sarah's eyes widened as she followed his gaze. Those aren't the usual scouts. The ones who hit the Richardson place were more obvious, trying to be seen. These men are professionals, McKnight finished. Former military, Confederate cavalry, most likely. They're doing this right, taking their time, gathering intelligence. He allowed himself a small smile. Too bad they're reading the wrong map. To most eyes, his homestead looked like any other in the territory, a solid 2-story house built of local timber, a large barn, corrals and various outbuildings needed for working the land. But McKnight had spent 5 years modifying every structure with the same attention to detail that had kept him alive through dozens of cavalry engagements. The barn's heavy timbers were reinforced with iron plates salvaged from abandoned mining. Equipment. The house's wall cavities were filled with sand and rock, able to stop most bullets. Gun ports disguised as decorative vents covered every approach. The corrals could be quickly converted into defensive positions, and he'd carefully maintained clear fields of fire in every direction. You should head back to town, McKnight told Sarah, his eyes still tracking the distant riders. And Sarah, might be a good time for that visit to your sister in Helena you've been talking about. She studied his face for a moment, understanding, dawning in her eyes. You're going to fight them, aren't they? These aren't just bandits, Thomas. They've got repeating rifles, military tactics. I've heard stories about the Hawkins brothers. They're butchers. McKnight's response was measured, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd led charges against Confederate artillery positions. I've met men like them before, in places a lot worse than this. They're used to terrorizing farmers and homesteaders. They don't know what it means to face someone who spent a lifetime learning the art of war. After Sarah departed, McKnight led Thunder back to the barn, his mind already mapping out the coming conflict. In the tack room behind, stacks of leather goods and horse supplies, a hidden door led to a space that hadn't seen use in years. The room housed an impressive collection of weapons and equipment he'd maintained out of habit. Springfield rifles, Colt revolvers, even a small brass mountain howitzer he'd forgotten to return after the war. More importantly, the space contained his military journals, detailed maps of the entire valley, and the tactical manuals he'd studied throughout his career. McKnight had always believed in being prepared, in understanding every aspect of his terrain. Now, those old habits were about to pay off. Through a carefully concealed observation port, he watched another group of riders pass by his main gate. Their horses were good stock, too good for simple outlaws. Their weapons were new, their gear well-maintained. These men had resources, organization. They'd probably expected this territory to be like all the others they'd terrorized. Isolated homesteaders, unable to mount any real resistance. McKnight began making preparations, his movements precise and methodical. He'd built this place with defense in mind, incorporating lessons learned from 15 years of frontier warfare. Every fence post could serve as cover, every ridgeline had been carefully measured for range. He'd placed markers throughout his property, innocent-looking rocks and fence posts that would help him calculate distances with deadly accuracy. Thunder nudged his shoulder, the horse sensing his rider's shift in demeanor. McKnight patted the animal's neck, remembering all the times they'd moved together through enemy territory, how the horse had learned to respond to the slightest touch, the quietest command. They'd survived Confederate artillery barrages, Sioux war parties, and some of the worst battles of the frontier Indian wars. "Looks like we've got one more campaign, old friend," he said softly, checking his saddle straps with practiced care. "Time to remind these boys why they used to call us the Prairie Ghost." The sun climbed higher, as McKnight continued his preparations. He knew the Hawkins gang's type. They'd want to make an example of him, show everyone what happened to those who didn't submit to their demands. They'd come in force, expecting to overwhelm any resistance with superior numbers and firepower. What they didn't know was that they were riding into carefully prepared killing grounds, about to face a man who'd spent his entire military career learning how to defeat numerically superior forces. McKnight had already spotted their scouts making elementary mistakes, missing his concealed observation posts, failing to notice the defensive modifications to his buildings, reading the terrain without understanding its tactical implications. The morning stretched on, and McKnight could feel the familiar calm settling over him, the focused readiness that had served him so well in countless engagements. The Hawkins gang was about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between terrorizing helpless civilians and facing a trained military commander on the ground of his choosing. Thunder's ears pricked again, and McKnight smiled slightly. More riders approaching, different directions this time. They were being methodical, he had to give them that. Too bad they were about to learn why some old soldiers never really retire and why you don't threaten a cavalry captain in his own territory. Inside his house, McKnight reviewed the letters scattered across his oak desk, intelligence gathered from various contacts throughout the territory. Joshua Hawkins, the gang's leader, had earned a reputation for ruthless efficiency during the war, leading cavalry raids that struck fear into Union supply lines. His younger brother Marcus had been equally notorious, known for his skill with explosives and his complete lack of mercy. Together, they'd transformed their wartime experience into a criminal enterprise that combined military precision with outlaw brutality. McKnight pulled out his old cavalry spyglass, studying the distant ridgelines. His property's elevation offered natural advantages he'd recognized immediately when he'd purchased it. The approaches were limited, channeled by steep rock formations and dense pine forests. Any large force would be forced to use predictable routes, making them vulnerable to a prepared defender. A Cooper hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the valley. McKnight watched its flight pattern, remembering how he'd used similar birds to spot Confederate positions during the war. Nature always told stories to those who knew how to read them. Right now, the hawk's behavior confirmed his suspicions. More riders were moving through his southern woodlot, trying to stay concealed among the trees. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He made his way to the barn's hayloft, accessing another hidden observation post. Through a narrow slit in the wooden walls, he could see fresh hoofprints near his western spring. The tracks showed horses unused to mountain terrain, their riders forcing them to move faster than was wise on the rocky ground. These weren't local men. They were outsiders, probably hired guns brought in from Texas or Kansas. The sound of approaching hooves drew his attention to the main trail. A single rider approached, moving with the confident swagger of someone used to intimidating others. McKnight recognized him from descriptions shared in town. Marcus Hawkins himself, come to deliver their business proposition personally. McKnight moved unhurriedly to his porch, positioning himself to appear vulnerable, while maintaining clear access to his concealed weapons. Thunder took up his usual position nearby, the horse's training allowing him to serve as both sentry and potential diversion if needed. Marcus Hawkins reined his horse to a stop at the bottom of the porch steps. He was younger than McKnight had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. His clothes were expensive, but cut to allow easy access to the guns McKnight knew he carried. "Mr. McKnight," Hawkins called out, his voice carrying the cultivated accent of someone trying to mask rougher origins. "Beautiful morning for a ride. Shame about all the trouble in the valley lately." McKnight leaned against his porch rail deliberately. projecting the image of a concerned but uncertain homesteader. "I heard about the Richardson place. Bad business, that." Hawkins nodded, feigning sympathy while his eyes constantly scanned the property, assessing its weaknesses. "Dangerous times we're living in. Never know what kind of threats might come your way." He reached into his coat, producing a folded document. "That's why I'm here, actually. Representing some investors interested in acquiring properties in the area, offering fair prices, good terms. Way we see it, it is better to sell to legitimate businessmen than risk losing everything to outlaws." McKnight noted how Hawkins's horse shifted restlessly, picking up on its rider's underlying tension. The animal was a fine Missouri foxtrotter, bred for smooth gaits and endurance, not the kind of horse a legitimate businessman would typically ride. Its tack showed signs of hard use, the kind that came from long rides and rough country. "Mighty thoughtful of you," McKnight replied, letting his voice carry just a hint of uncertainty. "But this land's been in my family a good while now, not really looking to sell." Hawkins' smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Times are changing, Mr. McKnight. Man your age, living alone out here, accidents can happen. Equipment fails, fires start. Smart folks understand when it's time to move on." McKnight straightened slowly, allowing just a fraction of his military bearing to show through his farmer's demeanor. "Sounds almost like you're threatening me, son." Something in his tone made Hawkins pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, before his practiced confidence reasserted itself. "Just offering friendly advice. Think about it. We'll be back tomorrow for your answer." He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, "For your sake. Hope it's the right one." As Hawkins rode away, McKnight's mind was already calculating distances, planning fields of fire, remembering lessons learned in a dozen frontier battles. These men thought they were predators, but they'd never faced someone who'd spent years hunting far more dangerous prey. They were about to learn why his cavalry unit had earned its reputation, and why some old soldiers never truly lose their edge. As dusk painted the Montana sky in deepening shades of purple, the acrid smell of smoke shattered the evening's peace. McKnight emerged from his barn to find an orange glow illuminating the western horizon. His grain storage, filled with the season's wheat harvest, had been reduced to a pillar of flame against the darkening sky. The fire's pattern wasn't random. McKnight recognized the work of experienced arsonists, accelerants placed strategically, multiple ignition points timed for maximum effect. Through the crackling flames, he caught glimpses of riders withdrawing into the tree line, their silhouettes briefly visible against the inferno they'd created. Thunder pawed the ground nervously as a series of smaller explosions erupted from within the burning structure. McKnight's jaw tightened. They'd rigged additional charges to detonate after the initial blaze, a technique he'd seen Confederate raiders use to target emergency responders. These men weren't just sending a message, they were demonstrating their tactical expertise. The sound of galloping hooves drew his attention as Daniel Webster, a young rancher from the neighboring spread, came charging up the trail. "Captain McKnight!" he called out, his voice carrying the urgency of someone bearing grave news. "The Hawkins gang, they've taken the Mitchell family hostage." McKnight's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver concealed beneath his coat. "When?" "Just after sunset. Rode in force into their homestead, maybe 20 men." Webster's words tumbled out in a rush. "They're demanding everyone in the valley to gather at the old church tomorrow at noon. Say they've got an announcement to make." Through his spyglass, McKnight studied the burning storage building, noting details others might miss. The fire had been set by someone with military demolitions training, the same techniques he'd seen employed during Sherman's march to the sea. These weren't common outlaws playing with matches. This was psychological warfare executed with professional precision. "They hit anyone else?" McKnight asked, though he already suspected the answer. Webster nodded grimly. "Anderson's place got torched. Old Man Thompson's cattle were scattered. They're moving systematic-like, working their way through the valley, according to some plan. A flicker of movement caught McKnight's eye. More riders along the ridgeline, maintaining surveillance. Their positioning spoke of formal military training. Each man placed to cover specific approaches while remaining in supporting distance of their companions. "Sarah, from the general store," Webster continued, his voice dropping lower. "She said you might know how to handle these types. Said you weren't just regular cavalry during the war." McKnight remained silent, watching as the fire consumed years of work. His mind was already calculating, analyzing patterns, remembering lessons learned in a dozen frontier campaigns. Asture, Hawkins' gang was escalating faster than he'd anticipated, moving to establish dominance over the entire valley in one coordinated operation. A horse whinnied in the darkness, not thunder, but something deeper in the shadows. McKnight's hand tightened on his revolver as four mounted figures emerged from the tree line. Their approach was deliberate, practiced, with the lead rider holding a lantern that cast dancing shadows across the yard. "Evening, gentlemen," called, out a voice that carried the refined edge of educated brutality. Joshua Hawkins himself, the elder brother, making his first appearance. His words carried the casual menace of someone used to having them obeyed. "Seems you've had some bad luck with fire safety tonight." McKnight studied the gang leader through eyes trained by years of combat. Joshua Hawkins sat his horse with the easy confidence of a seasoned cavalryman, his expensive clothes unable to hide the warrior's physique beneath. Two gun belts crossed his chest, carrying matched Remington revolvers positioned for rapid draw. "Mighty coincidental," McKnight replied, his voice carefully modulated to hide any hint of military bearing. "Same night the Mitchells have unexpected guests," Hawkins smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Dangerous times we're living in. Man needs friends, protection. Speaking of which," he gestured to one of his companions, who tossed a folded document onto McKnight's porch. "Previous offer still stands, though given recent events, the price has been adjusted accordingly." McKnight didn't move to retrieve the paper. "And if I'm still not interested in selling? Then you're not as intelligent as your reputation suggests." Hawkins leaned forward in his saddle, all pretense of civility dropping away. "Your military service commands certain respect, Captain. It would be a shame if this situation required more direct approach." The use of his former rank confirmed McKnight's suspicions. They'd done their research, knew about his cavalry background. What they didn't know, what no official record showed, was the true nature of his wartime activities. The missions that never made it into any report, the operations that had earned him the nickname Prairie Ghost. "Noon tomorrow at the church," Hawkins continued, straightening in his saddle. "Valley's changing hands one way or another. Smart men know when to adapt." His eyes flickered to the burning storage building. Stubborn ones tend to have unfortunate accidents. As the riders withdrew into the darkness, McKnight's tactical mind was already processing their encounter. Joshua Hawkins carried himself like a man used to command, but there had been tension in his posture, a barely perceptible edge that suggested things weren't going entirely to plan. They'd expected the night's show of force to break the valley's resistance immediately. Webster waited until the riders were well away before speaking. "What are you going to do, Captain?" McKnight's response was measured, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a man who'd led charges against Confederate artillery positions. "Get word to everyone you trust. Tell them to be ready, but not to do anything rash. And Daniel, might be a good time for the women and children to visit relatives in safer territory." After Webster departed, McKnight moved with practiced efficiency. In his bedroom, a hidden panel concealed a brass telescope. Not the simple spyglass he used for daily tasks, but a precision military instrument he'd acquired during the war. Through it, he could make out details of the gang's positions along the ridgelines. They'd established a perimeter, with scouts positioned to observe any movement in the valley. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the darkness, followed by the distant sound of breaking glass. A warning round, deliberately fired high to shatter one of his upper windows. They were demonstrating their range, their accuracy, trying to reinforce their psychological advantage. McKnight allowed himself a grim smile. They'd fired from the North Ridge, about 800 yards out. Good shooting, but not exceptional. More importantly, they'd revealed their position, confirming his analysis of their tactical deployment. Every shot they fired, every move they made, told him more about their capabilities and their limitations. In his basement command center, McKnight activated a series of carefully hidden lanterns that illuminated detailed maps of the valley. 15 years of cavalry operations had taught him the value of thorough reconnaissance, of knowing every fold in the terrain, every potential advantage or hazard. He'd spent years preparing this position, incorporating lessons learned in countless frontier engagements. Thunder's alert posture caught his attention, more movement outside but different this time. Through his observation port, McKnight spotted 3 figures moving with the stealthy precision of experienced scouts. They were good, using the shadows effectively, maintaining proper intervals. Too bad they didn't know about the carefully concealed tripwires that would alert him to their exact position. A metallic click from the darkness confirmed his preparation. One of his warning systems had been triggered. The scouts were probing his defenses, looking for weaknesses, trying to map his security measures. Let them look, he thought. Everything they were finding had been carefully planned to shape their perception, to guide them toward the conclusions he wanted them to reach. The hours crept toward midnight as McKnight continued his preparations. Each piece of equipment was checked with mechanical precision, each weapon cleaned and loaded with the care that had kept him alive through dozens of combat engagements. Through his various observation points, he tracked the movement of Hawkins's men throughout the valley, noting their patterns, their procedures, their strengths, and their mistakes. They were professional. He had to give them that. Their perimeter was well organized, their communications coordinated through a series of lantern signals he recognized from Confederate cavalry tactics. But they were also overconfident, assuming their military experience made them invincible against simple homesteaders and farmers. By midnight, McKnight had confirmed at least 30 riders operating in the valley, with probably another 20 in reserve. Significant forces, well-armed and well-mounted, they'd chosen their ground carefully, establishing strong points at key locations, controlling major trails and water sources. Traditional military doctrine would call it an overwhelming advantage. But McKnight hadn't survived 15 years of frontier warfare by following traditional doctrine. As he watched another pair of scouts pass his property, he remembered similar nights spent observing Confederate positions, preparing for operations that would be spoken of in whispers around cavalry campfires. The Hawkins gang was about to learn why some old soldiers never truly retire, and why you don't threaten a cavalry captain who spent a lifetime perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. A soft knock at his back door drew his attention. McKnight moved silently through the darkness, his Winchester rifle ready. Through a concealed peephole, he recognized Benjamin Fletcher, the local telegraph operator who'd served under him during the war. "They've cut the lines, Captain," Fletcher whispered once inside, his face illuminated by the dim lamplight. "But not before I got a message through to Colonel Harrison in Fort Shaw. He says the 3rd Cavalry, tied up with Sioux troubles near Yellowstone, can't spare any troops for at least a week." McKnight nodded, having expected as much. The Hawkins gang had timed their move carefully, knowing military resources were stretched thin, dealing with various Indian uprisings. "Any other news from the wire?" Fletcher pulled out a crumpled paper. "Intercepted messages between their observers. They're bringing in more men from their hideouts near the Powder River, professional gunmen, former soldiers. Word is, they've hired some of Brady's raiders, the ones who specialized in torch and burn operations during the war. Brady's raiders. McKnight remembered them well. A particularly vicious Confederate cavalry unit that had terrorized Union supply lines, known for their expertise with explosives and their complete disregard for civilian casualties. Their presence confirmed his assessment of the situation's gravity. Through his observation port, McKnight spotted movement near the burning storage building. Several riders were examining the structure's remains, likely looking for signs of any attempts to salvage goods or extinguish the flames. Their methodical approach spoke of formal military training in reconnaissance. "They've got observers on every high point," Fletcher continued, sketching positions on McKnight's map. "Using an old Confederate signal system, flags during day, lanterns at night, coordinated, professional, but—" He hesitated. "What is it, Ben?" "Something's got them spooked. Overheard one of their men in town talking about previous operations. Usually, they don't commit this many resources unless they're expecting serious resistance. It's like they know something about this valley that has them worried." McKnight allowed himself a slight smile. His reputation from the war years must have reached them. Fragments of stories about the prairie ghost and his unconventional tactics. Good, let them worry. Fear had a way of making even professional soldiers forget their training. A series of distant lantern flashes caught his attention, the gang's signalers coordinating their night operations. McKnight had already broken their basic code, another legacy of his wartime experience. The messages confirmed his earlier assessment. They were establishing a complete perimeter around the valley, preparing for tomorrow's demonstration at the church. "How many families are still in the valley?" he asked Fletcher. "Most of the women and children are gone, headed for relatives in safer territory. About 15 men are still here, mainly veterans from both sides of the war. They're scared, but not running. Looking to you for guidance, Captain." McKnight studied his tactical maps, mind working through scenarios he'd planned for years. The valley's terrain offered natural advantages to a defender who knew how to use them. Narrow passes, hidden draws, countless places where a small force could ambush a larger one. "Get word to the others," he instructed. "Tell them to attend tomorrow's meeting, appear compliant, but have them ready. When this starts, it's going to happen fast." After Fletcher departed, McKnight continued his surveillance. Through his various observation points, he tracked at least 4 more groups of scouts, probing his property's perimeter. They were good, using terrain for cover, maintaining proper intervals. But their very professionalism made their movements predictable to someone who'd spent years studying military tactics. A distant owl call caught his attention. Not a real owl, but a signal he recognized. More of Hawkins's men moved into position along the eastern ridge. They were establishing interlocking fields of fire, preparing fallback positions. Traditional cavalry doctrine effectively executed. Too bad they didn't know they were playing right into his hands. McKnight moved to his basement armory, methodically checking his preparations. Years of living in Indian territory had taught him the value of redundancy. Multiple weapons cached at strategic points, ammunition stored in weatherproof containers, emergency supplies positioned for quick access. Everything maintained with the same precision that had kept him alive through countless engagements. Thunder's soft nickering alerted him to more movement outside. Through his spyglass, McKnight observed a small group approaching his front gate. Their manner was different from the earlier scouts, more aggressive, less concerned with stealth. Professionals putting on a show of force, wanting to be seen. Leading them was a face McKnight recognized from wanted posters. Michael Torch Brady himself, the infamous Confederate demolitions expert. His presence confirmed the seriousness of tomorrow's demonstration. Brady had a reputation for creating explosive displays that terrorized civilian populations into submission. They were escalating faster than expected, bringing in their most dangerous operators early. But in their arrogance, they'd made a crucial mistake. By showing their full capabilities too soon, they'd given McKnight valuable intelligence about their strengths and methods. As midnight approached, McKnight completed his final preparations. Each piece of equipment was checked and rechecked, each weapon positioned for quick access. Through his years of frontier service, he'd learned that victory often depended on preparation as much as execution. The Hawkins gang had brought in their best men, their most experienced killers. They had numbers, firepower, and professional training. But they were about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between terrorizing civilians and facing a seasoned cavalry commander who'd spent years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. Dawn broke over Shadow Creek Valley with an unnatural stillness. McKnight stood at his kitchen window, sipping coffee from a tin cup as he observed 3 wagons rolling past his property. The vehicles appeared ordinary enough. Weathered wood, canvas covers, typical frontier construction. But his experienced eye caught details others might miss. Reinforced axles designed to handle extra weight. Suspension modified for rough terrain. The kind of adaptations he'd seen on military supply wagons during the war. The Hawkins gang was bringing in heavy equipment, preparing for something far beyond simple intimidation. Through his spyglass, McKnight noted other concerning details: brass fittings glinting beneath the canvas covers, the distinctive shape of field artillery pieces carefully concealed under hay bales. A sharp rap at his door announced the arrival of James Cooper, the local blacksmith who'd fought with the 1st Missouri Cavalry during the war. "They're setting up blocking positions," Cooper reported without preamble, his voice tight with professional concern. "Got sharpshooters on Miller's Ridge, heavy weapons team at the creek crossing, military-grade hardware, Captain, Springfield, rifles, maybe even a Gatling gun." McKnight absorbed the information while scanning the distant ridgelines. The gang's deployment was systematic, each position chosen to control key terrain features. "How many men have you counted?" 50, maybe 60 in the valley now, more arriving by the hour. They've got runners positioned at regular intervals, maintaining communication lines, saw them bringing in specialized equipment too. Demolition charges siege weapons. This isn't just about taking over ranches anymore. The morning sun illuminated fresh hoofprints near McKnight's corral. Another night reconnaissance team had probed his defenses while pretending to be lost travelers. Their questions had been casual, designed to seem innocent, but they'd been mapping approaches, noting defensive positions, gathering intelligence for the coming confrontation. Through his concealed observation post, McKnight watched a group of riders escorting a heavily loaded wagon toward the old church. The driver's posture and the wagon's careful handling suggested its cargo was delicate, probably explosives. Torch Brady's signature. He liked to wire entire buildings with demolition charges, creating spectacular displays of destruction that shattered civilian morale. "They've got the Mitchell family locked in the church basement," Cooper continued, his weathered face showing deep concern. "Using them as insurance against any resistance. Brady's men have been setting charges throughout the building. One wrong move." McKnight's tactical mind was already calculating angles, timings, vulnerabilities. The gang's use of hostages complicated things, but it also revealed their own uncertainties. They wouldn't need such extreme measures if they were truly confident in their position. A rhythmic pounding drew their attention, construction sounds from the direction of the church. Through his spyglass, McKnight observed gang members establishing firing positions, reinforcing walls, transforming the simple building into a fortified strongpoint. Their engineering work showed formal military training, each position designed to cover potential approaches. "There's something else," Cooper added, lowering his voice. "Overheard some of their men talking. They're not just here for the valley. This is part of something bigger. They're establishing a network, connecting territories from Wyoming all the way to the Canadian border. Shadow Creek is strategic, controls access to 3 major trails, perfect choke point for running operations." The pieces clicked into place. The gang's unusual level of preparation, their professional approach, the quality of their equipment. This wasn't just another territorial takeover. They were building an empire, using military expertise to establish control over vital transportation routes. Thunder's alert posture warned them seconds before hoofbeats approached. McKnight and Cooper moved to concealed positions as 5 riders emerged from the morning mist. At their head rode Marcus Hawkins, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a figure McKnight hadn't seen in years. Colonel William Blackwood, formerly of the Confederate Army's Engineering Corps. Blackwood's presence changed everything. He'd been one of the Confederacy's most brilliant defensive strategists, known for transforming simple positions into impregnable fortresses. His involvement explained the gang's sophisticated tactical approach and their focus on controlling key terrain. "Morning, gentlemen," Blackwood called out, his Virginia accent carrying clear authority. "Thought we might have a professional discussion before today's meeting, soldier to soldier, as it were." McKnight stepped onto his porch, maintaining the appearance of a simple farmer, while his mind raced through implications. Blackwood's involvement suggested this operation had backing from powerful interests, possibly even territorial officials looking to establish private control over frontier regions. "Beautiful defensive position you've got here," Blackwood continued, his experienced eye surveying the property. "Natural choke points, clear fields of fire, multiple fallback positions. You've put considerable thought into your preparations." "Captain, the kind of thought that suggests you've been expecting trouble for quite some time." The colonel's words carried layers of meaning. He was acknowledging McKnight's military expertise, while subtly warning him that his defensive preparations hadn't gone unnoticed. "Man learns to be careful in Indian territory," McKnight replied neutrally. Blackwood smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "Indeed, just as he learns that sometimes the wisest course is to recognize when he's outnumbered and outgunned. We've brought in specialized units, Captain, men with particular skills in reducing strong points. Would hate to see all your careful work go up in flames." A distant explosion punctuated his words. Another demonstration, this one taking out the bridge over Shadow Creek. The blast was precisely calculated, destroying the structure while leaving nearby buildings untouched. Brady's expertise at work, showing what awaited those who resisted. "Consider this a professional courtesy," Blackwood continued. "In an hour we're going to demonstrate exactly what happens to those who don't understand changing times. The Mitchells will learn that lesson first, I'm afraid. Unless, of course, the Valley's leaders show proper wisdom." As if to emphasize his point, more riders appeared along the ridgeline. Their positions were carefully chosen, each man placed to cover specific approaches while maintaining clear lines of retreat. Professional deployment, the kind that spoke of formal military training. "You've got until noon," Marcus Hawkins added, his tone carrying none of Blackwood's refinement. "After that we start making examples, beginning with that fine barn of yours." After they departed, Cooper turned to McKnight. "They're not just hiring gunmen anymore. Bringing in Blackwood, that's different. He was one of the best." McKnight nodded, his mind already adapting plans to account for this new threat. Blackwood's involvement explained the gang's unusually sophisticated approach. The colonel had literally written manuals on frontier fortification during the war. Through his various observation points, McKnight watched the valley transform into an armed camp. The gang was establishing interlocking fields of fire, creating mutually supporting positions that could cover any approach. Under Blackwood's direction, they were turning the entire valley into a fortress. But they'd made a crucial mistake. By showing their full capabilities so early, by bringing in their strategic expertise, they'd revealed the true scope of their operation. More importantly, they'd shown their own fears. They wouldn't commit such resources unless they were genuinely concerned about potential resistance. The morning wore on, as McKnight completed his preparations. Each weapon was checked and rechecked, ammunition positioned for quick access. Through his years of frontier service, he'd learned that victory often depended on understanding your enemy's mindset as much as their capabilities. The Hawkins gang had brought in their best strategists, their most experienced operators. They had numbers, firepower, and professional leadership, but they were about to learn that some old soldiers never lose their edge, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who spent years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. Sudden commotion from the direction of town drew McKnight's attention. Through his spyglass, he observed a group of riders escorting a distinctive black carriage toward the church. The vehicle's construction and the quality of its team spoke of wealth and influence. More significantly, it bore the territorial governor's seal on its door. "Political backing," Cooper muttered, recognizing the implications. "This goes higher than we thought." McKnight watched as several well-dressed men emerged from the carriage, their manner suggesting government officials rather than frontiersmen. Among them was Judge Edwin Caldwell, known for his convenient interpretations of territorial law when it benefited certain interests. Through his concealed listening post near the church, McKnight could make out fragments of conversation. The officials were discussing territorial development contracts and resource management rights, bureaucratic language masking the reality of what was happening. The Hawkins gang wasn't just building a criminal empire, they were establishing a quasi-legal framework for controlling the entire region. The sound of hammering echoed across the valley as Brady's men continued fortifying positions. Their work showed sophisticated engineering, interlocking fields of fire, reinforced fighting positions, carefully planned escape routes. Under Blackwood's direction, they were transforming familiar terrain into a military stronghold. Sarah Bennett's daughter, Lucy, who served as a schoolteacher in Fort Blessing, arrived breathless at McKnight's back door. "Captain, they're bringing in more families," she reported, her voice tight with concern. "The Hendersons, the Wilsons, anyone who might have influence in the valley, holding them at the old mill under armed guard." McKnight's tactical mind processed this new information. The gang was gathering potential hostages, people whose safety would force compliance from others in the community. But their very thoroughness betrayed their underlying uncertainty. They wouldn't need such elaborate precautions if they were truly confident in their position. Through his observation posts, McKnight tracked increasing activity throughout the valley. Supply wagons moving under heavy guard, messengers maintaining communication between positions, scouts patrolling established routes. The gang's operations showed military precision, but also a rigidity that could be turned against them. A series of sharp cracks echoed from the direction of Miller's Ridge. Test firing from the gang's sharpshooters, establishing range markers. Their accuracy was impressive, but each shot revealed more about their positions and capabilities to McKnight's experienced eye. "They're setting up artillery on Hawkins Point," Cooper observed, using McKnight's spyglass to study the distant ridge. 12-pounder Napoleon cannon by the look of it. Military surplus, probably bought from corrupt quartermasters after the war. The presence of field artillery confirmed McKnight's assessment. This wasn't just about intimidating homesteaders. The gang was preparing for potential military intervention. They intended to hold the valley against all comers, using it as a base for expanding their control across the territory. Thunder's alert posture warned them moments before another group approached. Joshua Hawkins himself, accompanied by Blackwood and several other officers. Their manner was different now, carrying the confidence of men who believed victory was assured. "Last chance, Captain," Hawkins called out, reining his horse at the property line. "Colonel Blackwood here has finished his tactical assessment. By noon, this valley becomes ours, one way or another. The only question is how many people have to suffer before you and the others accept reality." McKnight studied their positions, noting how they maintained careful spacing, each man positioned to cover the others. Professional soldiers playing outlaw, believing their military training made them invincible against simple civilians. What they didn't understand, what their very professionalism prevented them from seeing, was that McKnight had spent years preparing for precisely this type of confrontation. Every fence post, every tree line, every seemingly random feature of his property had been carefully positioned to serve specific tactical purposes. As the church bell tolled 11, McKnight observed a curious detail through his spyglass. The gang's messengers had shifted their routes, avoiding certain areas of the valley. Their new patterns suggested they'd discovered some of his early warning systems and were adapting their movements accordingly. A smart tactical adjustment, but one that forced them into more predictable paths. Lucy Bennett's voice dropped to a whisper as she shared one final piece of intelligence. The telegraph operator in Fort Blessing overheard something before they cut the lines. They're not just building an empire, they're creating an entire shadow government. Judge Caldwell's already signed documents transferring legal authority over 3 territories to their front companies. McKnight absorbed this information while watching Brady's men position their final demolition charges. The gang's plan was ambitious, combining military force with political manipulation to establish lasting control over the frontier. They'd thought of everything, except the possibility that a simple farmer might have spent years preparing for exactly this type of threat. Through the morning haze, he caught glimpses of the gang's forces completing their preparations. Each movement revealed more about their strategy, their capabilities, and most importantly, their assumptions about what they were facing. As the deadline approached, McKnight found himself recalling an old lesson from his cavalry days. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who threatens loudly, but the one who waits silently, watching and learning. As the deadline approached, McKnight descended into the root cellar beneath his barn. Behind carefully stacked preserves and farming supplies, a hidden doorway led to a chamber that hadn't seen use since his arrival in the valley. The space smelled of gun oil and leather, illuminated by specially designed lanterns that wouldn't be visible from outside. Rows of Springfield rifles lined one wall, each weapon modified for enhanced accuracy. Beside them stood crates of ammunition, organized by type and purpose. Percussion caps, paper cartridges, and specialized rounds filled shelves built into the rock walls. But these weren't his most significant preparations. McKnight pulled aside, a heavy canvas tarp revealing a brass mountain howitzer, a lightweight artillery piece he'd acquired during his final frontier campaign. The weapon had been carefully maintained, its bronze barrel gleaming in the lamplight. More importantly, he'd stockpiled ammunition specifically designed for its unique capabilities. "Lord above," Cooper whispered, examining the ordnance collection. "You've been planning for something like this since you arrived." 5 years of watching Confederate raiders taught me the value of preparation, McKnight replied, checking the howitzer's firing mechanism. "But this is just the hardware. The real advantage is in the terrain modifications." Through another concealed door, they entered a passage that connected to several observation posts throughout the property. Each position had been carefully engineered to appear natural while offering strategic advantages. Gun ports disguised as ventilation holes covered every approach. Reinforced positions that looked like ordinary farm structures could withstand direct artillery fire. McKnight consulted a detailed map spread across a wooden table. Red marks indicated the locations of carefully prepared surprises, defensive positions, false trails, and natural features he'd modified to serve tactical purposes. He'd spent years transforming his property into a carefully crafted battlefield, one that would force any attacking force into predictable patterns. "These marks here," he indicated several blue crosses, "show underground storage caches, ammunition, weapons, medical supplies, everything needed to sustain a prolonged engagement. Each one is carefully waterproofed and maintained. Cooper studied the map with professional appreciation. You've turned the whole property into one giant tactical position. But how did you manage all this construction without anyone noticing? Piece by piece, season by season. Every time I repaired a fence or improved a building, I was adding to the defensive network. The valley itself provides natural advantages. I just enhanced them. A series of pulleys and counterweights operated sliding panels that could rapidly transform barn doors into protective barriers. Hidden trapdoors allowed quick movement between positions. Every feature had been designed with multiple purposes, creating a complex defensive system disguised as ordinary farm architecture. These marks here, McKnight pointed to several green circles on the map, indicate special preparations, places where the ground has been subtly modified to channel mounted movement, areas that look solid but won't support the weight of heavy weapons. 5 years of careful engineering, all designed to control how an attacking force must move. Thunder's distinctive warning stomp alerted them to movement outside. Through a carefully concealed observation slit, they watched another group of Brady's demolitions experts examining the remains of McKnight's grain storage. Their investigation was professional, methodical, and completely focused on the wrong details. They're looking for traditional defensive preparations, McKnight explained. Reinforced walls, firing positions, the obvious stuff. They're not seeing the real modifications because they're too subtle. Every fence post, every tree line, every seemingly random feature serves a specific tactical purpose. Cooper nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've created killing grounds without them looking like killing grounds, forced channels that don't appear forced, even the way you've positioned your buildings. Standard military. Doctrine says this position is vulnerable from the North Ridge. That's where they'll place their heavy weapons, thinking they have perfect fields of fire. What they don't know is that Ridge has been carefully prepared to become a trap rather than an advantage. McKnight moved to another section of the underground complex, revealing racks of specialized equipment, signal mirrors designed to coordinate defensive efforts, specially modified scopes for night fighting, and tools for disrupting enemy communications. Each item represented lessons learned through years of frontier warfare. These are different from regular cavalry supplies, Cooper observed, examining a modified rifle sight. Some of this equipment, I've never seen anything like it. Special designs, developed for specific missions during the war. The kind of operations that never made it into official reports. When I left the service, certain items somehow found their way into my possession. A hidden desk held stacks of leather-bound journals, detailed notes on every aspect of the valley's terrain, weather patterns and tactical possibilities. McKnight had spent years studying how wind patterns affected visibility, how morning fog could be used for concealment, how seasonal changes altered fields of fire. This is the real advantage, he explained, indicating the journals. Not just knowing the terrain, but understanding how to use it. How to turn natural features into weapons, how to make the land itself fight for you. Through another observation port, they watched the Hawkins gang continuing their preparations. Under Blackwood's direction, they were establishing what looked like excellent defensive positions. What they couldn't know was that each position had been anticipated, each tactical choice quietly shaped by years of careful terrain modification. They're professional soldiers playing outlaw, McKnight noted, watching their methodical movements, following military doctrine, making textbook tactical decisions. That's their weakness. They're so focused on applying standard military thinking that they can't see the unconventional threats. From a hidden locker, McKnight retrieved his old cavalry saber, its blade still bearing the marks of frontier combat. The weapon was a reminder of lessons learned through years of warfare. Sometimes victory went not to the side with superior numbers or firepower, but to the one that best understood how to turn the environment itself into a weapon. Cooper examined a rack of specialized ammunition, noting the various types. "You've got enough supplies here to fight a small war." "That's exactly what's coming," McKnight replied, checking the action on a modified Spencer carbine. "But not the kind of war they're expecting. They're preparing for a traditional military engagement. What they're going to get is something very different." Thunder's alert posture warned them moments before another patrol passed. Through their observation post, they watched Brady's men conducting yet another survey of the property. Their movements were precise, professional, and completely unaware of the carefully crafted deceptions guiding their every assessment. "Look at how they're marking positions," McKnight indicated. "Standard military procedure for establishing fields of fire. Everything they're doing is by the book, which means everything they're doing is predictable." The underground chamber contained other specialized equipment, devices for creating diversions, tools for night operations, and mechanisms designed to turn simple farm features into tactical advantages. Each item represented careful planning and years of preparation. Most of these things, McKnight explained, showing Cooper a modified scope, aren't even weapons in the traditional sense. They're tools for controlling how the enemy must move and fight, for turning their own tactical doctrine against them. A distant explosion signaled another of the gang's demonstrations. Through their observation system, they watched as Brady's men destroyed a bridge over Shadow Creek. The blast was precise, professional, and completely unaware that the bridge had been specially modified years ago. Its destruction would force the gang to use exactly the routes McKnight had prepared for them. The morning wore on as McKnight completed his final preparations. Each piece of specialized equipment was checked and positioned according to plans developed over years of careful study. Through his network of observation posts, he watched the gang's forces continuing their preparations, each movement confirming they were falling perfectly into patterns he'd spent years preparing to exploit. Lucy Bennett appeared at one of the concealed entrances, carrying intelligence from town. "Captain, they've brought in something new. 3 covered wagons, heavily guarded. The drivers were wearing Confederate artillery uniforms." McKnight's expression tightened. "Gatling guns. Blackwood always favored mechanical innovations. Show me where they're positioning them." On his tactical map, Lucy marked 3 locations forming a triangular pattern around the church. The placement was textbook perfect for covering all approaches to the valley's center. What the gang didn't realize was that McKnight had anticipated this exact strategy years ago. "See these irrigation channels?" He traced lines on the map. "They look random, just a farmer's water management. But block the right ones, and those perfect artillery positions become island fortresses, isolated, cut off from support." Cooper examined another shelf of specialized equipment, unique tools designed for specific tactical purposes. "These mirror arrays, they're not just for signaling, are they? Concentrated sunlight makes an excellent distraction," McKnight explained, "especially when your enemy is trying to operate precision machinery like a Gatling gun. Every piece of equipment here serves multiple purposes." Through their observation network, they watched Brady's men establishing what they thought were cleverly concealed sniper positions. The gang's sharpshooters were professionals, carefully ranging their shots and marking firing lanes. They had no way of knowing that each position had been subtly engineered to become a trap at the right moment. "Your fencing pattern," Cooper noted, studying the property layout. "It's not random at all. You've created channels," McKnight confirmed, "subtle ones. The eye sees a typical ranch layout, but mounted men under pressure will naturally follow certain paths that lead exactly where I want them." A hidden cabinet revealed another layer of preparation, detailed dossiers on known gang members, their tactics, their preferences in combat. McKnight had spent years gathering intelligence, understanding not just their capabilities, but their thought patterns. These men aren't just outlaws, he explained, reviewing the files. They're former military, trained to think in certain ways. That training makes them dangerous, but it also makes them predictable. They'll follow doctrine, make textbook decisions, and every one of those decisions will play right into our hands. Lucy pointed to several unmarked areas on the map. What about these sections? They look exposed. That's intentional. Sometimes the best trap is open ground that looks inviting. Everything they see, every conclusion they draw, has been carefully shaped to serve our purposes. The underground chamber extended further than it first appeared, connecting to a network of concealed passages throughout the property. Each route had been carefully engineered to allow silent movement between defensive positions. More importantly, each passage could be quickly collapsed if needed, denying their use to any enemy who discovered them. The gangs brought in experts in military engineering, Cooper observed. Won't they spot some of these preparations? They'll spot what they're looking for: obvious defensive measures, traditional military preparations. Their expertise actually works against them. They're so focused on looking for things they understand that they'll miss everything else. Thunder's warning signal alerted them to more movement outside. Through their observation system, they watched another group of riders, conducting reconnaissance. These men moved differently, Mexican cavalry veterans, based on their riding style. The gang was bringing in specialists from multiple backgrounds. Good, McKnight noted, surprising Cooper. The more different military traditions they incorporate, the more they'll rely on standardized tactics to coordinate their forces. And standardized tactics are predictable tactics. A hidden workbench held tools for maintaining their specialized equipment. Every piece had been modified for silent operation. Oiled hinges, padded handles, dampened mechanisms. Years of frontier warfare had taught McKnight the value of controlling every sound in a combat environment. These modifications to your regular farm equipment, Cooper said, examining a seemingly ordinary plow. They're not just for show, are they? Everything serves multiple purposes, McKnight confirmed. That plow's shaft is actually a rifled barrel. Those harrow tines can quickly become caltrops. Even the irrigation pumps can be converted to spread smoke or chemicals if needed. The sound of hammering from the direction of the church indicated Brady's men were establishing their final positions. Through carefully hidden observation ports, McKnight and Cooper watched the gang's preparations with professional interest. Each defensive position they created, each tactical decision they made, revealed more about their plans and their assumptions. They're thinking like soldiers, McKnight observed, preparing for the kind of fight they understand. They've got no idea they're actually setting up their own defeat. As noon approached, the gang's activities took on increased urgency. More riders arrived, more weapons were positioned, more defensive preparations were completed. To any military observer, their setup would appear formidable. Interlocking fields of fire, mutually supporting positions, textbook-perfect tactical deployment. But McKnight saw beyond the obvious. Every position they established, every defensive measure they created, fit perfectly into plans he'd spent years developing. They thought they were preparing for battle, but they were actually arranging themselves exactly as he'd anticipated. The church bell struck 11:30. Its solemn toll carrying across Shadow Creek Valley with ominous finality. From his elevated observation post, McKnight watched a peculiar procession approaching the town square. Leading the column was a pristine Concorde coach, its black lacquer finish and polished brass fittings marking it as something far removed from typical frontier transportation. Behind the coach rolled a wagon unlike any seen before in the territory. Its bed had been modified to carry a massive safe, the kind used by large banking houses back east. The implications were clear. The Hawkins gang wasn't just planning to take the valley by force, they were establishing permanent financial infrastructure. Territorial bank charter, Fletcher reported, arriving breathless at McKnight's position. "Judge Caldwell signed it this morning. They're setting up a banking network across 3 territories. Anyone who wants to do business will have to go through them." The morning sun glinted off something metallic near the church steeple. Through his specialized scope, McKnight identified a signal heliograph, a sophisticated military device using mirrors to transmit messages over long distances. The gang was establishing a communication network far more advanced than simple riders or flag signals. "They've brought in specialists from the Treasury Department," Fletcher continued, his voice tight with concern. "Men who understand territorial banking laws, know how to create legitimate-looking documentation. This isn't just about controlling land anymore." A sharp crack echoed across the valley, another test shot from the gang's sharpshooters. But this report was different, carrying the distinctive sound of a British Whitworth rifle. These precision weapons had been rare even during the war, used only by the most elite Confederate marksmen. Through his observation network, McKnight watched Joshua Hawkins emerge from the coach, accompanied by figures whose bearing marked them as government officials rather than frontiersmen. Their presence confirmed the operation's scope. This was about establishing legal control over the entire region, using military force to create legitimate authority. "Got movement at the Mitchell place," Cooper reported through their concealed signal system. "They're setting up some kind of demonstration. Brady's men are rigging charges around the main house." McKnight's tactical mind processed this new information. The gang wasn't just planning to threaten the Mitchells, they were preparing to demonstrate their complete power over life and property in the valley. A show of force designed to shatter any thought of resistance. Thunder's alert posture warned them moments before more riders appeared. These men moved differently from the others, Mexican cavalry veterans mixed with former Confederate raiders. Their arrival marked a shift in the gang's strategy, bringing in specialists from diverse military traditions. "Captain," Lucy whispered, pointing toward the church, "look at what they're unloading from that last wagon." Through his scope, McKnight observed gang members carefully handling wooden crates marked with British military stamps. The containers' size and shape suggested ammunition for the Whitworth rifles, specialized rounds that could strike targets at unprecedented ranges. "They're not just planning to control the valley," Fletcher added, his experience as a telegraph operator lending weight to his analysis. "Those banking documents I saw, they're creating a whole shadow economy. Anyone who wants to ship goods, conduct business, even send mail, it'll all go through their network." A series of measured hoofbeats announced Colonel Blackwood's approach. The Confederate engineering officer rode with the precise bearing of a man who'd spent his life in military service. Behind him came Marcus Hawkins, leading a group of men whose equipment marked them as demolitions experts. "Your final opportunity, Captain," Blackwood called out, reining his horse at McKnight's property line. "We're prepared to offer you a position in the new territorial administration. Your military experience could be valuable in our organization." McKnight studied the colonel's escort, noting details that spoke volumes about their preparations. Each man carried specialized equipment, range-finding devices, survey tools, the kind of gear used for precise military engineering. They weren't just planning to take the valley, they were preparing to fortify it permanently. "Interesting proposition," McKnight replied, maintaining his carefully crafted facade of uncertainty. "Though it seems like you've already got plenty of military expertise." Blackwood's smile carried the cold calculation of a man used to measuring others for weakness. "We're creating something unprecedented, Captain. A private empire built on military precision and legal authority. The frontier is changing. Best to be on the winning side of that change." As if to emphasize his point, a massive explosion rocked the valley. Through his observation network, McKnight watched the Mitchells' barn dissolve in a carefully engineered blast. The destruction wasn't random. Specific charges had been placed to create a spectacular demonstration while leaving nearby structures untouched. "Noon approaches," Blackwood continued, his tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "At the church, we'll demonstrate exactly what happens to those who cling to outdated notions of independence. The Mitchells will learn that lesson first, followed by anyone else who refuses to acknowledge new realities." The colonel's words carried layers of meaning. This wasn't just about destroying resistance, it was about reshaping the entire frontier according to their vision. The gang's military expertise, political connections, and financial infrastructure were all pieces of a larger plan. Through his various observation posts, McKnight tracked increasing activity throughout the valley. The gang's forces were taking final positions, establishing interlocking fields of fire that would make conventional resistance suicide. Their deployment showed sophisticated tactical thinking and complete ignorance of the true threats they faced. "Consider carefully what happens next," Blackwood advised, turning his horse to leave. "In 1 hour, the old order in this valley dies. Best decide which side of that change you want to be on." As the colonel's group withdrew, McKnight's mind processed the evolving situation. The gang's plan was more comprehensive than even he had anticipated. They weren't just creating a criminal enterprise, they were establishing a complete system of control, military, political, and economic. Through his specialized scope, he watched Brady's men making final adjustments to their demolition charges. Around the church, their work showed professional expertise, precisely calculated explosions, designed to create maximum psychological impact. The message was clear: resist, and everything you value will be destroyed. The morning sun climbed higher. As riders continued arriving in town, each group brought specialized capabilities: former military engineers, financial experts, even government officials willing to trade authority for profit. The gang was assembling all the pieces needed to transform their criminal operation into a legitimate power structure. Thunder's warning signal alerted them to more movement, supply wagons arriving under heavy guard. Through his observation system, McKnight noted details that confirmed his tactical assessment. The gang wasn't just preparing for a show of force. They were establishing infrastructure for permanent occupation. They're positioning troops at every major trail junction, Cooper reported through their signal network. Setting up checkpoints, marking positions for permanent fortifications. Once they take control, they plan to lock down the entire region. McKnight's strategic mind processed this information while watching the gang's final preparations. Their plan showed impressive scope, combining military force, legal authority, and economic control into a comprehensive system of power. Too bad they had no idea they were arranging themselves exactly as he'd planned. A commotion near the general store drew his attention. Through his specialized scope, McKnight observed several men in business attire examining property deeds and land surveys. Their methodical approach suggested professional assessors, likely brought in to legitimize the gang's territorial takeover. "Registry. Officials from Helena," Lucy confirmed. "Having overheard their conversations in town, they're preparing documentation to legally transfer property rights. Anyone who refuses to sell will be declared in violation of new territorial development ordinances." The sound of hammering echoed from the church as Brady's men installed heavy iron fittings around the windows. The modifications weren't just for security. They were converting the building into a fortified strongpoint that could serve as a permanent command center. A distinctive whistle pattern from Cooper signaled more developments. Through their observation network, McKnight watched as gang members began distributing official-looking documents throughout the valley. The papers bore territorial government seals, new regulations requiring all residents to register their properties and business activities with the authorized regional authority. They're creating their own legal framework, Fletcher explained. Examining a copy of the documents, these regulations give them power to seize any property, control all commerce, even establish their own law enforcement. Everything wrapped in a veneer of legitimate authority. The morning sun revealed another wagon arriving under heavy guard. Its cargo consisted of printing equipment, not the simple presses used for local newspapers, but sophisticated machinery designed for creating official documents and currency. They're planning to issue their own script, Lucy reported, her experience as a schoolteacher lending weight to her analysis of the papers. Local currency that would be the only legal tender for business in the territory. Complete economic control. Through his scope, McKnight studied the men guarding the printing equipment. Their bearing and equipment marked them as former Treasury agents, the kind who'd gained experience dealing with Confederate currency operations during the war. This wasn't just about printing money. It was about establishing a complete financial system. Thunder's alert posture warned them moments before another group approached McKnight's property. This time it was Marcus Hawkins, accompanied by men whose formal attire couldn't quite hide their military bearing. "Final warning," Hawkins announced, his casual tone belied by the tension in his posture. "At noon, we're not just making examples. We're inaugurating a new era of territorial administration. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who resist." He gestured toward the Mitchell place, where Brady's men were completing their explosive preparations. Through his observation network, McKnight noted how the gang's forces had positioned themselves throughout the valley. Each unit was placed, according to formal military doctrine, creating what should have been an impenetrable network of control. Their very professionalism made their movements predictable, their tactical decisions easy to anticipate. "A sharp crack from the ridge," announced. "Another weapons test, but this one was different." The sound carried the distinctive report of experimental breech-loading rifles, the kind that weren't supposed to exist outside of military arsenals. The gang wasn't just well-armed. They had access to advanced weaponry that even regular army units lacked. "They've brought in Swiss mercenaries," Cooper reported through their signal system. "Former Alpine troops, specialists in mountain warfare. Seen their type during the war, expensive, but worth every dollar if you're planning to control elevated terrain." McKnight processed this information while observing the mercenaries' deployment. Their positioning showed expert understanding of mountain combat and complete ignorance of the specific challenges this valley presented. "Time grows short," Marcus Hawkins called out, preparing to depart. "When the church bell strikes 12, the old way of life here ends. The smart ones will accept change and profit from it. The rest—" His gesture encompassed the valley where gang members were completing their preparations for the demonstration. As Hawkins' group withdrew, McKnight's tactical mind analyzed their final dispositions. The gang had assembled an impressive array of forces: military specialists, government officials, financial experts, even foreign mercenaries. Each element of their plan reinforced the others, creating what should have been an unbreakable system of control. The morning sun highlighted their preparations throughout the valley. Checkpoints were established, defensive positions fortified, communication networks tested. To any military observer, their deployment would appear flawless. Each unit positioned to support the others, every approach covered, all possible resistance accounted for. What they couldn't know was that every position they'd taken, every defensive measure they'd established, had been anticipated years ago. Each tactical decision they made followed predictable military doctrine, arranging them exactly where McKnight had planned for them to be. As the tension in Shadow Creek Valley approached its breaking point, McKnight activated a signal system that had lain dormant since his arrival. 3 quick flashes from precisely positioned mirrors sent coded messages across the territory, calling in debts that had remained unpaid since the war. In his underground command center, McKnight consulted a leather-bound journal that contained no military records or tactical plans, but rather a list of names, men who'd served with him in campaigns that never appeared in official histories. Each entry included locations, capabilities, and specific codes that would verify the authenticity of his summons. Within 30 minutes, the first response arrived. Through his observation network, McKnight spotted William Swift Harrison approaching. From the north, riding with the fluid grace that had earned him his nickname. During the war, Harrison had been McKnight's scoutmaster, capable of moving through enemy territory like a ghost. "Recognize your signal pattern," Harrison said after being admitted through a concealed entrance. "Still using the old Cherokee code system, I see." His weathered face showed the miles he'd traveled, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. "Been working as a surveyor up in Helena. Learned some interesting things about our friends in the valley." McKnight spread his tactical maps as Harrison produced documents from his saddlebags, detailed surveys of the surrounding territory, including information about hidden trails and natural features that didn't appear on any official maps. More importantly, he brought intelligence about the gang's operations in other territories. "They've been establishing similar setups across the frontier," Harrison explained, marking positions on the map. "Banking networks, supply lines, communication systems. But this valley's different. This is where they're planning to establish their permanent command center." Thunder's distinctive alert signal warned them moments before two more riders approached. Brothers James and Michael Whitfield, who'd served as McKnight's demolition specialists. They arrived separately, using different trails, each carrying saddlebags filled with materials that wouldn't be found in any general store. "Got your message in Bozeman," James said, examining the gang's positions through an observation port. "Brought some special items I've been developing. New compounds that react to pressure rather than fuses. Perfect for controlling when and where an enemy can move." Michael's contribution was equally specialized. Precise topographical drawings of the valley's cave systems, including several that didn't appear on any official survey. During the war, he'd been their expert in underground warfare, using natural features to outmaneuver numerically superior forces. The afternoon brought more arrivals, each man bringing unique skills and critical intelligence. Theodore Walsh, former artillery officer turned architectural engineer, had spent the past year studying the gang's construction methods in other territories. His insights into their fortification techniques would prove invaluable. "They always follow the same pattern," Walsh explained, sketching defensive layouts. "Convert existing structures into strong points, establish interlocking fields of fire. Professional military engineering, but predictable if you know what to look for." Samuel Chen arrived next, moving so quietly that even Thunder almost missed. His approach. During the war, Chen had been their specialist in night operations and silent warfare. His Chinese ancestry had led many to underestimate him, usually their last mistake. "Been watching their operations near the Canadian border," Chen reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're creating an entire shadow infrastructure, supply lines, communication networks, financial systems, but they've made a crucial mistake here." Through their observation system, they watched the gang continuing their preparations, unaware that their every move was being analyzed by men who specialized in unconventional warfare. Each defensive position they established, each tactical decision they made, revealed more about their vulnerabilities. Robert "Doc" Morrison appeared as dusk approached, his medical bag containing items not found in any civilian practice. During the war, he'd been more than their surgeon. His understanding of human anatomy had made him equally skilled at ending life as saving it. "Brought some specialized supplies," Morrison said, revealing hidden compartments in his bag. "Compounds that can neutralize their sentries without raising alarms. Materials for creating diversions that'll affect their judgment without leaving traces." The arrival of Marcus Kane drew particular attention. The former Signal Corps officer had spent years developing sophisticated methods of battlefield communication. His presence would ensure their forces could coordinate effectively while disrupting the gang's own command systems. Their heliograph network is impressive, Kane noted, studying the gang's signal positions. But it's based on standard military codes. Give me an hour, and I can have them send orders that'll work against them. As night fell, more specialists arrived, each bringing unique capabilities. Thomas Jefferson Carter, expert in psychological warfare, had spent months studying how the gang manipulated civilian populations. His insights would help turn their own tactics against them. Eric Larson, Swedish-born weapons master, brought innovative modifications for their firearms, adaptations that would give them significant advantages in the coming conflict. His technical expertise had saved their unit numerous times during the war. Through their observation network, they watched the gang's forces settling into their positions, confidence making them careless. Their sentries maintained professional routines, never realizing that each predictable pattern made them more vulnerable. "They're following standard military doctrine," Harrison observed, watching the gang's patrols through specialized optics. "Setting up exactly the way they were trained. That's why they'll fail." McKnight's assembled team represented decades of combat experience. But more importantly, they understood how to wage unconventional warfare. Each man had specialized in turning an enemy's strength into a weakness, using their expectations against them. The underground command center hummed with activity as each specialist contributed to the developing plan. Morrison prepared his medical supplies while simultaneously identifying vulnerable points in human anatomy. Chen mapped shadow paths through the valley while calculating precise strike points. Kane established their own communication network, using methods that would appear as natural phenomena to untrained observers. Signal fires that looked like normal cooking smoke, bird calls that carried coded messages, even the pattern of hung laundry could convey critical intelligence. The Whitfield brothers prepared their specialized demolitions, designing compounds that could be triggered by the enemy's own movements. Their devices would appear as natural features until the precise moment they were needed. Walsh analyzed the gang's fortifications, identifying structural weaknesses that wouldn't be apparent to conventional military engineers. His architectural knowledge would allow them to neutralize defensive positions the gang thought impregnable. Through the gathering darkness, McKnight's team continued their preparations. Each man understood his role, knew exactly how his specialized skills would contribute to the overall plan. More importantly, they recognized that their greatest advantage lay in their ability to wage war in ways their enemies wouldn't expect. Thunder's alert posture warned them of another patrol approaching. Through their observation system, they watched Brady's men conducting their nightly security check, never realizing they were being studied by specialists in unconventional warfare. "They're good at what they know," Harrison commented, watching the patrol's methodical movements. "Too bad they don't know what they're actually facing." The night deepened as McKnight's team finalized their preparations. Each specialist contributed unique insights, identifying vulnerabilities that wouldn't be apparent to conventional military thinking. The gang had brought in their best forces, established textbook-perfect defenses, created what they thought was an unbreakable system of control. What they couldn't know was that their very professionalism made them predictable, their military expertise becoming a weakness when faced with men who specialized in unconventional warfare. The stage was set for a conflict unlike anything the frontier had seen, a battle between those who followed military doctrine and those who had spent their lives learning to defeat it. As midnight approached, two more specialists joined McKnight's assembly. Peter Blackwood, no relation to the Confederate colonel, arrived with innovations developed during his years as a mining engineer. His expertise in underground systems and structural weaknesses would prove invaluable. Been studying their construction methods, Blackwood explained, unrolling detailed diagrams. They're reinforcing buildings according to military engineering manuals. Makes them strong against conventional attacks, but creates predictable stress points. Hit them right, and their own fortifications become traps. Francis O'Malley, former Navy demolitions expert, brought specialized knowledge of waterborne operations. His understanding of how to use rivers and streams as weapons could transform the valley's waterways into strategic advantages. Their water supply system is vulnerable, O'Malley noted, examining the gang's infrastructure. They're following standard military procedures for securing water sources, haven't considered how those same procedures create exploitable patterns. Through their surveillance network, the team observed Brady's men conducting final security checks. The gang's night operations showed professional discipline, regular patrols, coordinated checkpoints, systematic coverage of key positions. Look, at their sentry rotation, Chen pointed out, clockwork precision, change guards every 2 hours, follow exact routes, makes them feel secure but gives us perfect timing windows. Harrison's scout training revealed other opportunities. Their patrol paths create blind spots, small ones, not noticeable unless you know exactly where to look, but string them together. He traced lines on their tactical map, showing hidden approach routes through seemingly covered areas. Kane had finished establishing their alternative communication system. Using natural elements, wind chimes, animal calls, even the pattern of smoke from chimneys, they could coordinate complex operations without any obvious signals. Best part is, Kane explained, demonstrating a particular bird call. They'll be monitoring for military communications. These methods look completely innocent to anyone trained in conventional warfare. The Whitfield brothers had completed preparation of their specialized devices. Unlike traditional explosives, these were designed to blend perfectly with natural features until activated. Pressure triggers disguised as ordinary rocks, James demonstrated. Temperature-sensitive compounds that look like morning frost. Everything is calibrated to react at exactly the right moment. Morrison's medical knowledge provided another tactical advantage. His understanding of human physiology helped identify optimal times for action based on natural body rhythms. Their guard shifts are planned around standard military schedules, he noted. Means we can predict exactly when their alertness will be lowest, when fatigue starts affecting judgment. Walsh's architectural analysis revealed structural weaknesses in the gang's fortifications. They've reinforced everything according to engineering manuals, makes the building stronger, but also creates predictable failure points. Like building a house with all its load-bearing walls in standard positions. Through their observation posts, they watched the gang's forces conducting final night preparations. Each movement followed precise military protocols, establishing what should have been an impregnable defensive network. Larson had finished modifying their weapons with innovations that would provide crucial advantages. Silent firing mechanisms, specialized ammunition designed for specific targets. Everything is calibrated for maximum effect with minimum indication of source. Carter's psychological warfare expertise added another dimension to their planning. They're expecting resistance to follow certain patterns. Their entire security system is designed around conventional military thinking, makes them blind to unconventional threats. The underground command center had become a hub of specialized preparation. Each expert contributed unique insights, identifying vulnerabilities that wouldn't be apparent to traditional military observers. Thunder's alert signaled another patrol approaching. Through their surveillance system, they watched Brady's men checking perimeter security, never realizing their methodical approach created predictable patterns. Their very thoroughness works against them, Harrison observed. So focused on following proper military procedure that they can't see alternatives. The night deepened as McKnight's team refined their preparations. Each specialist's contribution added layers to their unconventional strategy, creating a plan that would appear as random chaos to enemies trained in traditional warfare. The gang had established what they thought was complete control over the valley. Their defensive positions were textbook perfect, their security measures professionally executed, their tactical deployment precisely according to military doctrine. What they couldn't know was that each carefully planned defense, each professional security measure, each textbook perfect tactical position made them more vulnerable to the unconventional warfare specialists gathering in McKnight's command center. The first grey light of dawn revealed an unsettling transformation in shadow. Creek Valley. Mist clung to the lowlands, but this wasn't the natural morning fog. Through his specialized optics, McKnight observed the subtle, bluish tinge that marked it as chemical smoke, an innovation Brady's men had deployed during the night. Standard military crowd control technique, Morrison explained, examining the vapor through a brass instrument of his own design. Meant to disorient resistance, make people compliant, but they've miscalculated the valley's air currents. The pre-dawn stillness carried unusual sounds, the subtle clicking of specialized equipment being positioned, the soft whir of mechanical devices being calibrated. The gang was making final preparations for their demonstration, unaware that each new defensive measure revealed more about their vulnerabilities. From his elevated observation post, McKnight watched Joshua Hawkins conducting a final inspection of their positions. The gang leader moved with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured, examining their preparations with professional satisfaction. "Notice how they've positioned their heavy weapons," Walsh pointed out, studying the gang's deployment through specialized lenses. "Textbook, perfect for conventional warfare. But they've created predictable fire lanes, channels we can exploit." Harrison's scout training revealed additional details. The gang's sentries maintained precise intervals, their movements coordinated with military precision. To untrained eyes, their coverage would appear flawless, but their very professionalism created patterns that could be anticipated and circumvented. Chen emerged silently from a reconnaissance circuit, his dark clothing allowing him to move unseen, even in the growing light. "They've established 3 layers of security," he reported, marking positions on their tactical map. "Outer perimeter, inner defensive line, core security zone, standard military doctrine for urban control." Through their surveillance network, McKnight's team observed Brady's men making final adjustments to their explosive preparations. The demolitions expert had rigged key structures throughout the valley with sophisticated charges, creating what he thought was an unbreakable web of control. "Look at their detonator placement," James Whitfield noted, his expertise in explosives allowing him to spot crucial details. "They're using new electric firing systems, British military design, impressive technology but dependent on predictable power sources." The morning air carried the metallic sound of weapons being checked and loaded. The gang's forces conducted their final equipment inspections with professional thoroughness, each man following precise military protocols. "Their ammunition distribution follows standard logistics patterns," Larson observed, his weapons expertise noting significant details, central supply points, designated reloading positions, makes their resource management efficient, but creates exploitable vulnerabilities. Kane's analysis of their communication system revealed similar patterns. The gang had established a sophisticated network of signals and codes, all based on military standards. Their very efficiency made their messages predictable to someone who understood the underlying patterns. "They're using modified cavalry signals," Kane explained, demonstrating how their system worked. "Complex enough to seem secure, but ultimately based on standard military protocols. Give me 10 minutes of their transmissions. I can read everything they're sending. O'Malley's survey of the valley's water systems showed how the gang had modified natural features for tactical purposes. They'd established control points at key locations, following military engineering guidelines for securing critical resources. Standard procedure for controlling civilian populations, O'Malley noted, indicating specific modifications. Restrict water access, you control movement, but they haven't considered how those same control points become vulnerabilities. Through their observation posts, McKnight's team watched the gang's forces conducting final position checks. Each unit moved according to precise timetables, establishing interlocking fields of fire and mutual support zones. Their deployment is perfect, Harrison commented, his scout's eye catching crucial details. If they were facing a conventional military force, but their training makes them blind to unconventional approaches. Blackwood's mining expertise revealed additional opportunities. The gang had reinforced key structures according to military engineering manuals, creating what they thought were impregnable positions. Look at their foundation work, he indicated, showing specific modifications. They've strengthened everything against standard attacks. But those same reinforcements create stress points we can exploit. The morning sun revealed more of the gang's preparations. They'd transformed the valley into what should have been an impregnable fortress, every position covered, every approach controlled, every tactical advantage secured according to military doctrine. Morrison's medical knowledge provided insights into their operational patterns. The gang's duty rotations, rest schedules, and deployment timing all followed standard military guidelines designed to maintain peak efficiency. Their whole system is based on predictable biological rhythms, Morrison explained, marking specific time windows. Makes their operations efficient, but also tells us exactly when they'll be most vulnerable. Carter's psychological warfare expertise identified additional patterns in their preparation. The gang's show of force, their demonstrations of power, their methods of intimidation, all followed established military protocols for controlling civilian populations. They're creating a calculated atmosphere of inevitability, Carter noted, analyzing their methods. Standard psychological warfare technique make resistance seem futile through an overwhelming display of force. Through their surveillance network, McKnight's team observed the gang's final security sweeps. Each patrol followed precise routes, each checkpoint operated on exact schedules, each defensive position maintained professional discipline. Thunder's alert posture warned them of approaching riders, Joshua Hawkins himself, accompanied by Colonel Blackwood and their core command group. Their bearing showed absolute confidence in their position, certainty that their military expertise guaranteed victory. 1 hour until the demonstration, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying clearly through their observation system. Time for anyone with sense to accept the inevitable. After noon, resistance becomes exponentially more costly. The morning sun climbed higher as McKnight's team made their own final preparations. Each specialist checked their equipment, confirmed their positions, and ensured every element of their unconventional strategy was ready. The gang had established what they believed was complete control over the valley. Their defensive positions were perfect according to military doctrine, their security measures professionally executed, their tactical deployment precisely coordinated. What they couldn't know was that each carefully planned defense, each professional security measure, each textbook perfect tactical position had been anticipated and countered by specialists who had spent their lives learning to defeat conventional military thinking. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike anything the frontier had witnessed. A battle between those who followed established military doctrine and those who had mastered the art of turning that very doctrine against them. Lucy Bennett, arrived with crucial intelligence from town. The gang had established a sophisticated command post in the bank building, converting the vault into a secure operations center. Through the windows, she'd observed telegraphers installing new equipment, not standard Morse devices, but advanced British military models capable of encrypted transmission. "They're coordinating with other territories," she reported, sketching the layout of their communication center. Messages going out in some kind of numerical code, something about Phase 2 beginning at sunset. McKnight's tactical assessment shifted. The gang's operation in Shadow Creek Valley wasn't just about establishing local control. It was part of a synchronized campaign across multiple territories. The noon demonstration would signal the start of similar actions throughout the frontier. Through their observation system, they watched specialized equipment being unloaded from a heavily guarded wagon. The devices appeared civilian at first glance, but Harrison's experienced eye noted military modifications. "Range-finding equipment," he explained, studying the gear through his scope. "Latest Army Corps of Engineers design. They're establishing a precise firing grid for their artillery, standard procedure for coordinated bombardment." Chen's silent. Reconnaissance revealed another layer of preparation. The gang had positioned observers at high points throughout the valley, each equipped with sophisticated optical devices. "Not just watching movements," Chen reported. "They're mapping lines of sight, calculating trajectories, planning for systematic coverage." During their demonstration, Walsh's architectural expertise identified the purpose of last-minute modifications to key buildings. The gang's engineers had reinforced certain structures while subtly weakening others, creating a calculated pattern of destruction. "They're planning a progressive display," Walsh noted, indicating specific points. "Each building rigged to fall in sequence, maximum psychological impact with minimum actual damage to valuable infrastructure." O'Malley's analysis of water control points showed additional preparation. The gang had installed specialized valves at key locations, giving them the ability to instantly cut off supply to resistant areas while maintaining flow to compliant ones. "British colonial control technique," he explained, marking the control points. "Used it in India, demonstrate absolute power over basic necessities without disrupting their own operations." Through their surveillance network, McKnight's team observed Brady's men making final adjustments to their explosive system. The demolitions expert had created an intricate web of charges, each calibrated for precise effect. A series of distinctive whistles echoed across the valley. The gang's specialized signal system coordinating final positions. Kane's expertise in military communication allowed him to decode their meaning. "They're establishing multiple command centers," he reported, tracking the patterns. "Redundant control points, each capable of independent operation. Standard military protocol for urban pacification." Morrison's medical knowledge revealed the purpose of supplies being distributed to key positions. Beyond standard ammunition and weapons, the gang's men were being issued specialized chemical compounds. "Crowd control agents," he noted, identifying specific containers. "Military-grade irritants designed to break resistance without leaving evidence. They're preparing for prolonged occupation." Blackwood's mining experience showed how the gang had modified underground features. They'd established hidden storage areas and escape routes following military engineering principles for urban warfare. "Look at their tunnel reinforcement," he indicated, pointing out specific techniques. "They're not just planning for today's demonstration, they're creating permanent infrastructure for long-term control." Larson's weapons expertise identified new details about their armament. Beyond standard military firearms, the gang had equipped key positions with experimental weapons designed for crowd suppression. "Compressed air guns," he explained, studying their deployment. "Silent operation, no powder signature. Perfect for covert elimination of resistance leaders." Carter's psychological warfare analysis revealed patterns in their final preparations. The gang was establishing visual dominance through calculated display of force, following proven military methods for breaking civilian morale. Everything positioned for maximum psychological impact, he noted, indicating sightlines and positioning. They're creating a theater of inevitability. Thunder's alert signaled more movement. Supply wagons arriving under heavy guard. The cargo revealed another aspect of their planning. Official-looking documents, ledgers, and legal forms. Administrative infrastructure, Lucy reported after, observing the delivery. Everything needed to establish legitimate-appearing authority. Tax records, property registers, business licenses. The morning sun illuminated more details of their preparation. The gang had transformed Shadow Creek Valley into a model of military occupation, every aspect designed to establish and maintain absolute control. Through their observation posts, McKnight's team watched the gang's final deployment. Each unit took precisely planned positions, creating what should have been an unbreakable network of control and surveillance. The church bell tolled 11:30 as Joshua Hawkins conducted a final inspection. His satisfaction was evident as he observed their preparations. Military precision applied to civilian subjugation, every detail executed according to proven doctrine. What he couldn't know was that his very thoroughness, his professional attention to military procedure, had created exactly the opportunities McKnight's team of specialists needed. The stage was set for a demonstration, but not the one the gang had planned. The church bell's final toll faded into an unnatural silence as noon arrived in Shadow Creek Valley. Through his specialized scope, McKnight observed Joshua Hawkins mounting the church steps, preparing to begin his demonstration of power. The gang leader's confident stance suggested a man certain of his complete control over the situation. Behind Hawkins, Brady's men had positioned themselves with military precision, their weapons trained on the assembled townspeople. The display of force was calculated to break any thought of resistance. What they couldn't know was that McKnight's team had already set their own demonstration in motion. A subtle vibration trembled through the ground, not the expected explosion from Brady's charges, but something else. O'Malley's modifications to the valley's water system had begun their work, silently undermining the gang's carefully prepared positions. Water pressure building in the diverted channels, O'Malley reported through their secure communication system. 10 minutes until the first foundation shifts become visible. Their reinforcements are working against them now. Through their observation network, McKnight's team watched the gang's forces maintain their disciplined positions. Each man stood exactly where military doctrine dictated, creating what should have been an impregnable defensive network. Chen's silent operatives had already infiltrated key positions, moving through gaps in the gang's security that existed precisely because of their strict adherence to standard military protocols. Their presence wouldn't be detected until it was too late. Look at their heavy weapons placement, Walsh noted, observing through specialized optics. Perfect textbook positioning. They've created exactly the stress points we need. The architectural engineers' calculations had predicted how the gang's own fortifications would contribute to their defeat. Harrison's scouts reported additional details about the gang's deployment. Their perimeter security followed precise military spacing, creating predictable patterns that McKnight's men could exploit. First phase ready, James Whitfield confirmed through their signal system. His specialized charges, disguised as natural features, had been positioned to take advantage of the gang's tactical assumptions. Hawkins raised his hand, preparing to signal the start of his demonstration. The gesture would have triggered Brady's explosive network, beginning a calculated sequence of destruction designed to shatter the valley's resistance. Instead, a different, kind of demonstration began. The first sign was subtle, a slight discoloration in the chemical smoke the gang had deployed. Morrison's counteragents, introduced through carefully positioned dispensers, began transforming their crowd control vapor into a navigational hazard for their own forces. Chemical reaction progressing as calculated, Morrison reported. Their own smoke will begin affecting their visibility in precisely 2 minutes. Specialized filters ready for our people. Through their surveillance system, McKnight's team observed the first cracks appearing in the gang's perfect military formation. The ground beneath their heavy weapons positions had begun shifting, causing minute but crucial changes in their prepared firing angles. Foundation subsidence proceeding exactly as planned, Blackwood confirmed. His mining expertise had identified how to use the gang's own reinforcement work against them. Their gun platforms will begin shifting in 3 minutes, not enough for them to notice immediately, but enough to throw off their pre-calculated firing solutions. Kane's communication. Experts had begun their own operation, introducing subtle disruptions into the gang's signal network. Their military-grade heliographs were still transmitting, but the messages being relayed were gradually being altered. Their communication grid is compromised, Kane reported with professional satisfaction. Every third signal now carries our modified content. Their own protocols prevent them from recognizing the infiltration. Larson's modified weapons remained silent, their specialized ammunition prepared but not yet revealed. The gang's forces maintained their dominant positions, unaware that their tactical superiority was already being systematically undermined. Weapons ready in elevated positions, Larson confirmed, all firing angles calculated to take advantage of their predictable responses. Carter's psychological warfare elements added another layer to their operation. Subtle environmental modifications, carefully positioned mirrors, engineered acoustic effects, precisely calculated light patterns began creating disorientation among the gang's forces. Cognitive disruption elements in place, Carter noted. Their military training will make them resist, acknowledging the effects, which only increases their vulnerability. Hawkins began his prepared speech, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with practiced authority. Citizens of Shadow Creek Valley, you're about to witness a demonstration of the new order. Those who resist will learn. His words were interrupted by the first visible sign that something had gone wrong. The chemical smoke, now transformed by Morrison's agents, began behaving strangely. Instead of maintaining its calculated dispersal pattern, it started flowing in unexpected directions. Their visibility is compromising exactly as planned, Morrison confirmed. Their own chemical agents are now working according to our calculations. Through their observation posts, McKnight's team watched the gang's forces maintaining their professional discipline. Their very training worked against them. They continued following standard military protocols, even as the situation began diverging from their expectations. Thunder's alert posture signaled the next phase beginning. The ground beneath the gang's heavy weapons positions had shifted enough to affect their carefully prepared firing positions. Their own reinforcement work, designed according to military engineering principles, now channeled the structural stress. In precisely calculated ways, engineering stress points performing as predicted, Walsh reported. Their defensive positions are becoming self-compromising structures. O'Malley's water system modifications reached critical pressure. Underground channels, following paths the gang's engineers hadn't detected, began undermining their prepared positions. Hydraulic erosion is proceeding on schedule, O'Malley confirmed. Their defensive network is being hollowed out according to plan. Chen's infiltrators maintained their hidden positions, each man prepared to exploit the vulnerabilities created by the gang's rigid tactical doctrine. Their presence remained undetected precisely because the gang's security followed predictable military patterns. Strike teams in position, Chen reported silently, ready to exploit their tactical blind spots. Harrison's scouts provided continuous updates as the gang's perfect military formation began experiencing unexpected complications. Their professional discipline prevented them from adapting quickly to the deteriorating situation. They're maintaining textbook defensive positions, Harrison noted, makes their responses completely predictable. Through their surveillance network, McKnight's team observed Brady growing increasingly agitated as his explosive system began behaving erratically. The demolitions expert's military expertise prevented him from recognizing how his own technical sophistication was being used against him. "The detonation network is compromised," James Whitfield confirmed. "Our induced currents are creating statistical anomalies in their firing circuits." The gang's forces maintained their dominant positions, their military training keeping them focused on conventional threats. They remained unaware that their very professionalism, their adherence to standard doctrine, had made them vulnerable to McKnight's unconventional strategy. Hawkins attempted to continue his demonstration speech, but the cumulative effects of McKnight's preparations had begun creating visible disruption. The gang's perfect military operation was unraveling in ways their training hadn't prepared them to recognize or counter. The first strike hadn't been a direct attack. It was the culmination of carefully prepared circumstances, each element designed to turn the gang's own military expertise against them. Their professional discipline, their tactical doctrine, their engineering principles all became vulnerabilities when faced with opponents who specialized in unconventional warfare. The stage was set for a demonstration, but not the one Hawkins had planned. The gang was about to learn why some old soldiers specialized in turning military doctrine against itself, and why conventional warfare failed against opponents who understood how to make preparation itself a weapon. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Colonel Blackwood's face as he noticed something wrong with their heliograph network. The sophisticated communication system designed to coordinate their forces across the valley had begun transmitting contradictory orders. Signal degradation advancing through their command structure, Kane whispered through their secure channel. Each unit now receives slightly different instructions. By the time they realize the discrepancies, their coordination will be compromised. Through his specialized optics, McKnight observed the first signs of confusion among the gang's officers. Their military training made them hesitate to question orders that appeared to come through official channels, even as those orders subtly conflicted with their prepared plans. The Swiss mercenaries, positioned on the ridge for specialist mountain warfare, reported unusual difficulties with their footing. Blackwood's mining work had destabilized their positions in ways invisible to standard military engineering inspection. Rocky outcrops are shifting, according to calculations, Blackwood confirmed. Their advanced mountain training works against them. They're compensating for normal terrain movement patterns that don't apply here. Lucy Bennett's intelligence network brought crucial updates from town. The gang's command post in the bank building had begun experiencing unexpected problems with their sophisticated equipment. Their encryption devices are malfunctioning, she reported. Something about magnetic disturbances affecting the mechanisms. Their messages to other territories are becoming garbled. The disturbances were no accident. Walsh had incorporated specific metals into the building's reinforcement work, creating subtle electromagnetic fields that interfered with sensitive military equipment. Their technical sophistication becomes a weakness, Walsh noted with professional satisfaction. The more advanced their systems, the more vulnerable they are to engineered environmental factors. Brady's growing frustration became visible as his carefully prepared explosive network continued behaving erratically. The demolitions expert's experience with conventional military ordnance hadn't prepared him for the sophisticated countermeasures McKnight's team had deployed. Induced current patterns disrupting their detonator synchronization, James Whitfield explained. Their own safety protocols are preventing them from overriding the system failures. Through their observation posts, McKnight's team watched the gang's perfect military formation, experiencing more complications. Their heavy weapons crews reported increasing difficulty maintaining their prepared firing positions. Ground subsidence, accelerating under their gun platforms, O'Malley confirmed. Water pressure undermined their foundation work exactly as planned. Their own reinforcement techniques are channeling the damage. Morrison's altered chemical agents continued their work, creating visibility problems that specifically affected the gang's prepared defensive positions. Their military-grade gas masks, designed to filter standard smoke, proved ineffective against the modified compounds. Their protective equipment is working against them, Morrison reported. The filters are actually concentrating the disorienting effects. Standard military countermeasures amplify rather than reduce the impact. Chen's infiltrators maintained their hidden positions, each man prepared to exploit the growing confusion in the gang's ranks. Their presence remained undetected as the gang's forces focused on traditional tactical threats. Strike teams ready, Chen confirmed silently. Their security patterns are becoming increasingly predictable as they try to maintain military discipline. Harrison's scouts provided continuous updates as more cracks appeared in the gang's defensive network. Their rigid adherence to military doctrine prevented them from adapting to the deteriorating situation. They're responding exactly as their training dictates, Harrison observed. Each compensatory measure they take follows standard military procedure, making their next moves entirely predictable. Larson's modified weapons remained silent, their specialized ammunition prepared to exploit specific vulnerabilities in the gang's defensive positions. Each firing solution had been calculated to take advantage of their tactical assumptions. Target acquisition confirmed, Larson reported. Their textbook defensive postures create perfect engagement angles. Carter's psychological warfare elements continued their subtle work, creating cumulative disorientation among the gang's forces. Their military training made them resist acknowledging the mounting psychological pressure. Cognitive disruption advancing through their command structure, Carter noted. Their resistance to accepting non-standard threat patterns increases their vulnerability. Through their surveillance network, McKnight's team observed the gang's officers struggling to maintain control as their perfect military operation encountered increasing complications. Each attempt to restore order through conventional means only deepened their tactical predicament. Thunder's alert posture signaled another phase of their operation beginning. The ground beneath the gang's defensive positions had shifted enough to affect their carefully prepared fields of fire. Their own fortification work, built to military engineering specifications, now channeled structural stress in ways they couldn't detect. Engineering failure points developing as calculated, Walsh confirmed. Their defensive network is becoming a self-compromising system. The gang's forces maintained their dominant positions, their training keeping them focused on conventional threats. They remained unaware that each professional response, each tactical adjustment, each engineering solution only served to deepen their vulnerability to McKnight's unconventional strategy. The first strike continued without a single shot fired. A systematic undermining of military doctrine by specialists who understood how to turn preparation itself into a weapon. The gang was about to learn why some battles are lost before the first engagement, and why traditional warfare fails against opponents who understand how to make the enemy's strength become their weakness. In the weeks that followed the conflict, at Shadow Creek Valley, tales of what transpired spread across the frontier like wildfire. The Hawkins gang's carefully constructed empire of intimidation crumbled, not through direct confrontation, but through the calculated expertise of men who understood how to turn military doctrine against itself. The Territorial Governor's Office conducted a formal investigation, discovering evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of frontier administration. Judge Caldwell's carefully forged documents became the key to unraveling a network of criminal enterprises disguised as legitimate business ventures. Sarah Bennett reopened her general store, now serving as an unofficial museum displaying captured items from the gang's sophisticated operation. The British military equipment, advanced communication devices, and specialized weapons told a story of how professional expertise could become a fatal weakness when faced with unconventional opposition. "People keep asking how we did it," McKnight remarked to Harrison as they watched the valley return to normal. "They expect tales of dramatic gunfights, explosive confrontations, can't seem to understand that the real victory happened before the first shot was fired." Through his specialized scope, McKnight observed work crews dismantling the gang's elaborate fortifications. Each defensive position they deconstructed revealed more about how military engineering principles had been turned against their creators. "Found something interesting in their command post," Fletcher reported, arriving with documents recovered from the bank vault. Detailed intelligence reports about every major territory from Wyoming to the Canadian border. They weren't just building an empire, they were creating an entire shadow government. The papers revealed the true scope of the gang's operation. Using military expertise combined with political corruption, they had planned to establish control over vital transportation routes throughout the frontier. Shadow Creek Valley had been chosen as their command center precisely because its tactical advantages appealed to conventional military thinking. Their own professionalism defeated them, Walsh noted, examining the remnants of their defensive network. Every position chosen according to military doctrine, every fortification built to engineering specifications, made their responses completely predictable to anyone who understood how to exploit standard tactical thinking. Morrison's analysis of their captured medical supplies revealed another layer of their operation. The gang had acquired military-grade chemical agents, crowd-control substances, and sophisticated equipment for maintaining long-term occupation. They planned to use these valleys as forward operating bases, Morrison explained, cataloging the materials. Standard military doctrine for territorial control. Never considered that someone might understand how to turn those same protocols against them. Word spread through criminal circles about the fate of the Hawkins gang's elite forces. Other organizations quietly abandoned similar operations, reconsidering the wisdom of employing military expertise in frontier enterprises. The lesson was clear. Professional training could become a critical vulnerability when faced with opponents who specialized in unconventional warfare. Lucy Bennett's schoolhouse became an unofficial gathering place where people shared stories about the conflict. Each account emphasized different aspects, but all conveyed the same central truth. Victory often goes not to the side with superior force or training, but to those who understand how to make preparation itself a weapon. The Territorial Marshal's office is still trying to understand what happened, Cooper reported, bringing news from Fort Blessing. Their investigators keep looking for evidence of large-scale combat, can't grasp how an entire military operation was defeated without traditional warfare. McKnight's team had departed as quietly as they arrived, each man returning to their civilian lives, carrying new insights about the relationship between military doctrine and unconventional warfare. Their victory provided lessons that would be studied in frontier territories for years to come. Thunder's alert posture caught McKnight's attention as a group of army officers approached his property. Led by a colonel from the Department of the Frontier, they had come seeking understanding of how a small group of specialists had dismantled what should have been an unbreakable system of military control. "Your methods interest us, Captain," the colonel stated, examining captured equipment from the gang's operation. "Conventional wisdom says you couldn't have succeeded against their level of military expertise and preparation." McKnight studied the officer's bearing, recognizing the mindset of someone trained to think in traditional tactical patterns. "That's exactly why we succeeded, Colonel. Their expertise became their vulnerability. Everything they knew about military operations made their responses predictable." The morning sun illuminated the valley as McKnight explained how each element of their victory had been achieved through preparation rather than direct confrontation. The gang's professional military background had made them formidable against conventional opposition, but blind to unconventional threats. They established perfect defensive positions, McKnight continued, following every principle of military engineering, never realizing that their very thoroughness created patterns we could exploit. Their training made them respond exactly as we anticipated, turning their own expertise into a weapon against them. The colonel's expression showed growing understanding, as McKnight detailed how each aspect of the gang's military proficiency had been transformed into a vulnerability. Their sophisticated communication network, their advanced weapons, their tactical doctrine, all had been systematically undermined by specialists who understood how to exploit conventional thinking. "Most interesting," the colonel remarked, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "Your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about military engagement, suggests that professional expertise can become a critical weakness when faced with opponents who understand its underlying patterns." As the army officers departed, McKnight reflected on how the conflict in Shadow Creek Valley had demonstrated eternal truths about warfare. Victory often went not to the side with superior numbers or training, but to those who understood how to turn an enemy's strength into vulnerability. The afternoon brought more visitors, settlers from neighboring valleys seeking advice about protecting their communities. McKnight's response emphasized the importance of preparation over confrontation, of understanding how to make terrain and circumstance fight for you. The gang's mistake wasn't their military expertise, he explained to his attentive audience. It was their assumption that expertise guaranteed victory. They never considered that someone might understand how to use their own professional training against them. Sarah Bennett's daughter, studying the captured equipment displayed in the general store, perhaps summarized it best. They thought their military knowledge made them invincible, never realized that knowledge becomes a weakness when it makes you predictable. The legacy of Shadow Creek Valley spread beyond tales of conflict. It became a lesson in how victory often depends not on superior force or training, but on understanding how to turn an opponent's greatest strength into their critical vulnerability. As the sun set over the valley, McKnight watched the frontier returning to its natural rhythms. The gang's sophisticated operation, their military expertise, their professional training, all had been defeated not through traditional warfare, but through the calculated exploitation of their own tactical assumptions. The evening brought one final visitor, a young army lieutenant sent to make a formal record of the events. His questions revealed the military establishment's struggle to understand how conventional doctrine had been so thoroughly defeated. "The answer is simpler than you think, Lieutenant," McKnight explained, watching Thunder patrol the property line. "Victory doesn't always go to the side with the most training or firepower. Sometimes it goes to those who understand how to make preparation itself a weapon, and how to turn an enemy's expertise into their greatest vulnerability." The stars emerged over Shadow Creek Valley as McKnight concluded his account. The lieutenant's report would join others attempting to explain how a small group of specialists had dismantled what should have been an unbreakable system of military control. But the true lesson was written not in official documents, but in the unchanging principles of conflict that some old soldiers never forgot. The Hawkins gang had brought military expertise, professional training, and overwhelming force to Shadow Creek Valley. They had established what they thought was perfect tactical control, never realizing that their very professionalism made them vulnerable to opponents who understood how to turn military doctrine against itself. Their legacy served as a reminder that victory often depends not on superior numbers or training, but on understanding how to make an enemy's greatest strength become their critical weakness. In the end, they had learned why some old soldiers specialized in turning preparation itself into a weapon, and why conventional warfare fails against opponents who understand how to make military expertise defeat itself. The morning mail brought unexpected correspondence. A letter from a British military attaché requesting details about the specialized equipment captured from the gang. The sophisticated communication devices and advanced weapons had drawn international attention, revealing connections to arms merchants operating across multiple continents. Found shipping manifests in their records, Fletcher reported, bringing another stack of documents. They were establishing supply lines through Canada, planning to arm similar operations throughout the territories. Shadow Creek Valley was meant to be a prototype for larger campaigns. The territorial bank examiners uncovered a network of financial connections reaching into major Eastern institutions. The gang's operation hadn't just been about controlling frontier territories. They had been creating infrastructure for a sophisticated criminal empire disguised as legitimate business. Their ledgers tell quite a story, Sarah Bennett observed, examining the recovered financial records. Every military expenditure is carefully documented, every piece of equipment properly inventoried. Their own thoroughness provided evidence that helped dismantle their entire network. Chen's final reconnaissance of the valley revealed hidden caches of military supplies the gang had positioned for future operations. Each discovery demonstrated the scope of their planned expansion and the thoroughness of their preparation. "Found specialized equipment I've never seen before," Chen reported, displaying unique items recovered from their storage sites. Custom-made for specific military applications, they were planning operations that would have transformed the entire frontier. Walsh's analysis of their dismantled fortifications provided insights into advanced engineering techniques. The gang's military construction methods incorporated innovations that would have been impressive if they hadn't been turned against them. Their defensive architecture was revolutionary, Walsh noted, sketching design elements in his journal. Combined European military engineering with frontier adaptations. Too bad they never considered how those same innovations could become vulnerabilities. Morrison's examination of their medical supplies revealed another dimension of their operation. Beyond standard military provisions, they had accumulated sophisticated equipment for long-term population control. They were preparing for permanent occupation, Morrison explained, cataloging the materials. Everything needed to maintain military control over civilian populations. Their medical preparations alone would have cost a fortune. The Army Corps of Engineers sent specialists to study how McKnight's team had defeated the gang's defensive network. Their reports emphasized the innovative ways conventional military expertise had been transformed into tactical weakness. Most interesting aspect was the psychological element, Carter remarked to the engineering officers. Their professional training made them resist acknowledging unconventional threats, even as their position was being systematically undermined. Harrison's scouts continued discovering evidence of the gang's planned expansion. Maps recovered from their command post showed proposed operations extending from Mexico to Canada, each target chosen according to military strategic principles. They had everything planned out, Harrison observed, studying the documents. Supply lines, communication networks, defensive positions, all according to proper military doctrine, made their intentions completely predictable to anyone who knew what to look for. The territorial governor's investigation expanded as more evidence emerged. The gang's operation had been part of a larger conspiracy involving corrupt officials, business interests and foreign investors, all planning to profit from controlled destabilization of frontier regions. Found diplomatic correspondence in their records, Lucy reported, translating documents in multiple languages. They had connections to European military contractors, agreements with foreign governments. This wasn't just about frontier territories. Thunder's alert signaling caught McKnight's attention as more army investigators arrived. These men were different, specialists in unconventional warfare, sent to understand how military expertise could be turned against itself. Your methods challenge basic assumptions about tactical doctrine, their leader commented, examining captured equipment. Suggest that professional military training can become a critical vulnerability when faced with opponents who understand its fundamental patterns. O'Malley's analysis of their dismantled water control systems revealed sophisticated engineering stolen from British colonial operations. The gang had been adapting military occupation techniques from around the world. They were creating something new, O'Malley explained, demonstrating captured control mechanisms, combining different military traditions into an advanced system of territorial control. Never considered how that same sophistication could be used against them. The evening brought one final discovery, a hidden vault beneath the bank, containing detailed plans for future operations. The documents revealed the true scope of their ambition, creating an independent power structure within frontier territories, using military expertise to establish permanent control. Most telling thing about these plans, McKnight observed to the assembled investigators, is how perfectly they follow military strategic doctrine. Every decision is based on proper tactical thinking, made their entire operation vulnerable to anyone who understood how to exploit conventional military assumptions. As night fell over Shadow Creek Valley, the full impact of what had transpired became clear. The gang's operation hadn't just been about controlling territory. It had been an attempt to transform the frontier using military expertise and sophisticated technology. Their defeat served as a powerful reminder that victory often comes not through superior force or training, but through understanding how to turn an opponent's greatest strengths into vulnerabilities. The legacy of Shadow Creek Valley would be studied not just in frontier territories, but wherever men sought to understand the true nature of conflict and victory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.